All right, folks, welcome back to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, and as usual, I am joined by Tim the Source Anderson. We have a great, well, I trust everybody had a good, safe Easter yesterday. We have a great show today, a big show. We're going to talk a little bit about Anthony Fauci, who's all over the headlines today. We're going to do a little fact checking from some of his press conferences over the last few days, particularly the one on Friday. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some studies about school closures. We're going to get into voter analysis in Michigan, which is going to be really, really exciting. I'm excited to bring this to you guys. I think you're going to love it. And then Tim's going to talk to us about coming off these March lows and what the markets are doing. So let's get right into it, Tim. Okay.
Go.
Give everybody a quick market update, and then we'll get into some of what's going on with Dr. Fauci, and we'll talk about some of those numbers, some of those claims. I'm going to go ahead and fact check Dr. Doom, but go ahead, Tim. What's happening out there?
So we had a near record-setting week last week. The S&P 500 had its largest percentage gains since October of 1974. That's an astounding time frame to think about. And the Dow was up almost 13%. The S&P 500 up 12%. NASDAQ up 10.5%. Russell 2000 was really the biggest gainer on Friday. It was up 4.5%. I think mainly because of the Fed initiatives on their loan program, targeting those companies that fit kind of between the big multinational companies that have real structural problems in some key industries in our economy, and also between the lower and really smaller private companies that are part of the small business workplace. A lot of the Fed's activity to target those companies really speaks to the companies that fit the definition of the Russell 2000. It was up 4.5% on Friday. It was up, I believe, 16 or 17% last week. So really the market's got a lot of work to do now to digest those near record gains from last week. We're off a little bit today. We started the day maybe down 100, 150 points. Now we're down between like 300, a little over 300 points on the Dow. When you consider what the move that we had last week, I'm not really that alarmed by it yet. We did get an oil deal over the weekend after a tremendous amount of negotiation back and forth. Maybe we'll get into some of the details of that later. But it was a cut of about 10 million barrels a day in oil. Some people were looking for as much as 15 million. So we've got a little bit of a sell on the news event going on in oil right now. But regardless of how much oil production we would cut right away, the bottom line is we need demand to come back for oil, which means we need the economies to open back up around the globe for us to really work off all the supply that's been built up over the last 6 to 8 weeks.
And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And right, so we need demand for oil. And am I right here, Tim, to say that we're going to see these give and takes with the market? The fact is, though, we're up big. We're up 25% off those March lows. And giving up a little bit today, but anybody who watched the show last week, through Wednesday and Thursday, we were expecting some of those gains to give, and some at least profit taking, but we really just didn't see that. So it's not.
Yeah, and we're only 30 minutes into the day. So
right.
We had a tremendous amount of volatility intraday, particularly in the late afternoon during the last couple of weeks. So I think that this is kind of an expected early morning sell-off after a near historic rally last week, and even in a week which, of course, was holiday shortened with the market being closed on Good Friday.
If people go to People's Pundit Daily, it's right there as the featured story. Now you want to see and play around with those charts to see how much we really did come off those lows. So yeah, check it out. But like Tim said, we really need to get the economy going for some of that demand to come back. Trump said at the press conference the other day, Tim, that at the very least, what this was showing was pent up demand, right? So
Right.
it's out there. This was an artificial halt to economic activity, and
Right.
that it really is a good sign, at least what we're seeing. So some of those indications. Looking at the National Federation of Independent Business came out with a new survey, which is kind of gets into what we were talking about last week. Looks like 15% of small business have closed, but the demand is still there, and that's going to matter when we talk about how fast we're going to be able to bounce back from this. But let's get back, because it's not just the economy, right? It's school closures, and I want to talk a little bit about Anthony Fauci is all over Twitter. He did an interview, for people who don't know. He did Sunday interviews, as he's been doing. And basically, the New York Times has, this narrative right now that if Trump would have acted earlier, then there would have been lives saved. The irony of that, folks, is that the New York Times and the Washington Post and the rest of them, they were not talking about this as an issue. The Washington Post ran an editorial that the flu is more dangerous at the time frame that they're talking about Donald Trump needing to act quicker to save lives. At the time, Donald Trump halted travel to and from China, that he was criticized for it, right? So anyway, Anthony Fauci makes the rounds, and Jake Tapper asked him this question that is meant to. Everyone takes their cues. If people don't know this, they should. Everybody in the media and big media, corporate media, on the left, takes their cues from the New York Times, the great lady, right? So when she comes out with a narrative, everybody follows suit with her. All right. And that's the way this stuff goes. It's been like this for a long time. And so now their narrative is Trump should have acted earlier. They tried to bait him into these questions, and the way he answered it basically gave them some ammunition, is where I'm going with this, Tim. But I wanted to,
I didn't really see it that way, but go ahead.
Even if it didn't happen, I wanted to talk about this today because I called Tim on Friday in a fit over the way this guy, I'm viewing it now. It's just open deception. I mean, Anthony Fauci has been and continues to deceive people and deceive the president and the American public. And he is the media's favorite doctor. I'm not questioning the guy's credentials or whatever else. And people actually tell me he's a very nice guy, but I don't really care. There are millions of people being hurt by Anthony Fauci getting a lot of this stuff wrong. Anthony Fauci himself, who just, in February, late February, was telling the country that this was not going to be a big deal. And now it's only Donald Trump can be held accountable for information changing and rolling. But I want to get into this because on Friday during the press conference, if anyone who has followed me on Twitter and has, been watching the show knows, these school closures are a real problem. I am driven, and my opinions, my own personal opinions, are always driven, or at least I try to keep it that way, by data, by empirical evidence. And the school closures, as much I get what the right says, Tim, that this could help, and we talked about this before, that this could help homeschooling, and maybe that, but this isn't a organized transition to more homeschooling. This was a forced closure of schools. You have parents who responsibility has been dumped on them, whether they were ready or not. Millions are losing their jobs. Other millions are not able to teach their children. So this is not the way to force school, a change in how children are educated. I get that. And where I'm going with this is, we did a story over the weekend about what a review in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, found about school closures. And as we're doing this, Anthony Fauci holds his press, goes to the mic on Friday, and because Ron DeSantis down here, our governor, he wants to open up schools. He does. He wants to try to way to safely do this. He wants to find a way to safely do this. And he thinks that even if it's a few weeks, there's a plus to this, to getting kids back in school. And just hours after that, they ask Anthony Fauci about that. And he says that it is, quote, dangerous for people under 25, the virus. And we had just done this. We had just gone over. The truth is, and I want to pop this up, and I'm going to overlay this over Tim and I so people can see. He misrepresented the facts on the risks posed by COVID-19 to people under the age of 25. He completely misrepresented, and it is beyond the pale. It is impossible in my mind for one of the nation's top doctors to not know what he was doing was intentionally deceptive, is where I'm going with this. As of that date, there have been 5 deaths recorded due to the coronavirus, 2 people under 25 years old. One of them is under age 4 category. All right. And I'm going to pop this up soon so you guys can see it. We don't know, as with most people, the likelihood of comorbidities, here is high. We don't know the specific case of that infant, Tim. We don't. But I bet you, as one of the nation's top doctors and one of the leading voices on the coronavirus task force, that Dr. Anthony Fauci knows, like he's their general physician, like he's that child's pediatrician. Because if there's a death, the first death and only death of a baby, Tim, this guy is going to know everything about that case. That is his job. And then the other 4 in that category are between the age of 15 and 20 and below 25. So 15 to 24. And he used these stats. Oh, there are 5 people have died from the coronavirus. He used these stats so deceptively. I got mad. Tim will
So
tell
you're
you
talking about 5 deaths out of 20,000?
right. Well, and
why is nobody asking him a question about it? Why? Because it's completely irrelevant.
well, right, but he used it to try to push back on the idea that any state, the pushback on the idea that states should be looking at opening their schools again. And I'm going to pop this up. It's going to cover Tim and I up, but I did this because I want you to be able to see this, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the numbers. Here are the CDC deaths, recorded deaths, as of April 9th, and 1 to 4 years old, okay, from COVID-19. It's, like an infant, toddler, Tim, right? I guess 1 to 4 is. Also had pneumonia, if you look, by the way. And then you have the other 4 deaths in the 15 to 24 category, which I can't give out some of this and how we know this, but it does appear that there are vaping issues involved with at least 3, I believe it was. I don't know about the other one yet, but the bottom line is we're putting this up, and we're also putting up pneumonia and flu deaths so I can show people that under 1 year old, a child, a newborn to 1 year old, there have been 9 deaths from the flu so far this year in that age group. There are zero for the coronavirus. There have been 19 from pneumonia, and then you can see deaths from all causes in the almost 3,000 already this year. In the 1 to 4 age group, which has the only death from COVID-19, there are 26 pneumonia deaths. The pneumonia is 26 times more likely to kill a child between the age of 1 and 4. And then you have also 26 deaths. A lot of time there's overlapping data here, Tim. Like the child has pneumonia, they have influenza. A lot of times there's overlapping data. You have nothing between the ages of 5 and 14 from the coronavirus, but the flu has already taken 34 kids in that age group, and we didn't close down schools for it. Pneumonia took 26. And let's get to this. This is the last one with the highest number under 25 for the coronavirus, with only 4 deaths. And now 4 kids, it's horrible, of course. But again, we don't close schools because the flu took 35 people between the age of 15 and 24. Look at pneumonia in this category, folks. 87 individuals between the ages of 15 and 24. And I just lost it the other day when he used this to attack my governor and to spread, the idea, the fear, because there are a lot of people out there that I know who think this virus is dangerous and poses a great risk to children, and not even children, under the age of 25. And that is just flatly not true. And he did that to attack Ron DeSantis. And then to help the media, peg Donald Trump in a corner about, well, do you think it's wise? Ron DeSantis. Now, I will say this: the governor was wrong with his comments on Thursday. Tim, he did initially say, "I don't think anybody has died under the age of 25 from the coronavirus." That's obviously not true. But we know in that 15 to 24 that at least 3 of those individuals had other issues. Some related to vaping, which makes sense, by the way, as to why they're all lumped in that one group. And then we don't know the specifics with the toddler involved. It's not really an infant, toddler. But I bet you if we did know what Anthony Fauci knew, then we would be able to better explain this. I mean, the idea, though, Tim, I mean, I don't know about you, but
I don't think the deaths have anything to do with it. I don't think the deaths have anything to do with the reason for closing the schools. I think it's because the virus is so incredibly contagious that school kids can carry it and then infect other school kids who can then infect their parents or other people in their family.
Yeah, Tim, for instance, you can wash your hands. You can go home and kids can get showered. Right. That's ridiculous to keep them left back a year.
If you've ever worked in a large company, okay, I would say that every year, 80 to 90% of the people I knew that got the flu got it after their kids got it or after their kids had got something similar. Kids are like schoolyards and schools are like petri dishes for that. And it's always the kids that are carrying that then other people in their family get it. I mean, I could tell you almost every year when I worked at a very, very, very large company and there were 200 people on the trading room, almost every person I knew that would be out for 3 or 4 days at one point in time for the flu, the comments always were, well, of course my kids got it. And then after about 3 or 4 or 5 days, I could feel it coming down and then I got it. I think that's the reason why the schools are closed. It's been very clear from the very beginning that young people were not a high risk category to having a serious illness from this, even in China and in South Korea, where the first outbreaks were.
But that's my first and foremost point here. That's not what Dr. Fauci says. And that's not what he said on Friday, which was misleading. It was intentionally misleading because a man that smart cannot make a mistake like that. I can't believe a man that smart can make an honest mistake like that. I just don't believe it. That's number one. And number two, though, about what you're saying, you can, like in my household, the children get home because, the schools are petri dishes for everything they can be. And, they come home, they take showers, because something like the flu is more dangerous to the baby we have in the house. They come home, they jump in the shower before they do anything. That's a rule in our house. The risks do not the benefits of these closures. And by the way, before I even get into that, because to support this statement a little bit more, the reviews of 16 studies that we have now seen from, and let me pull this up, the Institute of, it's like, brain fart real quick, but it was from the University College London, UCL, and they looked at 16 different studies of past pandemics and epidemics. 6 of them, I believe, or 9, 6 or 9, no, 9. 6 looked at school closures that were during the 2003 outbreak of SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome. And it was in China, Hong Kong, Singapore. And I'll just read this right out loud. So in summary research, concluded the data suggested school closures did not contribute to the control of the epidemic. It just, they spread other ways. And then, of course, they look at, the downsides to keeping these children out of school, Tim. And like I've said now a million times. Rest assured, the Chinese are not going to leave their kids back or stunt the education of their children for a year. The future of their country, they are not going to handicap for something like this. But they sure got us to. And I'm all for homeschooling. The public school system is not ideal for everybody. And I would like to see more people. I would like to see communities do it, Tim. Like what we're doing now. It would be nice if we could have other kids to participate now. Now that we got it together a little bit with our kids, it would be nice for them to have that kind of, so at least they get a little bit more social interaction. But I mean, that's just not possible now. But right now, it's not an organized, move from public school system to homeschooling. So I do get the argument. People are saying, well, I would rather see more kids get homeschooled than be put into these indoctrination centers. I get that, but this was not this was not ideal. This is not an ideal situation. And, again, and that's actually, even though separate from the original point here, which is that Dr. Fauci, if you guys go back and look at his press conference, that was deception. There's just no way, in my mind, it was intentional deception for his own. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not in the man's mind. I'm not going to try to, you know what I mean? Oh, and then also, I got a couple bones to pick with him, Tim. I don't know if you caught his interview with Martha McCowan on Fox News, but he made multiple false statements in that interview. And when she asked him, why are we not doing what the Japanese are doing, for instance? They've had far less infections, far less deaths, and they did not shut everything down. Of course, though, they do have more PPE, apparently, and that would have taken us some time to build that up. But he said you have to be careful when comparing other countries that are different populations, different health. No kidding. That has been my whole beef the entire time. The models made assumptions using data from other countries. They applied it to the United States when it was not accurate. That is not sound statistics. And then when she asked about his use of the models to make recommendations to the president and how much did they factor into his decision making, he said nothing. And he said, I looked at what happened with China and Italy, and we don't need the models. Look at what happened to China and Italy. You just told her you got to be careful. You got to be careful when looking at other countries. But it's okay to look at China. I mean, that's wrong on multiple levels, Tim. Number one, you can't trust the Chinese like you can trust the Japanese. The Japanese are more trustworthy. And number two, China's culture, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit, for people who don't know, China's culture is almost like tailor-made for pandemics. Anybody who's ever visited China will tell you these aren't, first of all, the population's hygiene is poor. Some of that has to do with social status, but the population's hygiene is poor. You will be on public transportation, on a bus. They will spit on your foot in public. I mean, everybody's hawking everywhere. It is not at all like Japan, at all. So for him to make this idea that it's legitimate to compare Japan, to compare and look at China, but it's not legitimate to look at other countries that he doesn't like the examples of. This is why I'm telling you, Tim, this is why we're in this mess. I mean, you can't do that with statistics. Pick and choose which data set you want. It's just driving me, at this point, the guy's driving me nuts. I'm over him.
I think you're spending way too much time on him. He's not even going to be, he's 1 point of input for the president. And, the media might be glomming all over him. 3 months from now, you won't even remember who the guy was.
3 months from now, he may be a witness to the Democrats' committee to investigate the president. He may. Tim, he may.
Yeah.
That is their goal. That is a lot of people don't realize this too. This is actually, that committee was written into the stimulus bill. I mean, that was something Republicans either let go or just glanced over, but they got that. You know who did a Kimberly Strassel. She did a
Right.
great. She wrote about it. If people want to learn more about that committee, she put out a lot of good information on that. But yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, this is a tee up. You know, Trish Regan was fired for this. I'm not laughing because she lost her job. It's horrible. It's just, it never fails. You know, it really never fails when the media grabs something and latches onto it so hard. You can almost put it in the bank as something that's the complete opposite of what they're trying to sell you. You know, Trish Regan made an observation, lost her job for it, and it's something that's already, well, they're trying to bring it to fruition. You know, it's just completely unbelievable. But I don't know. What are your thoughts before we move on here? I just had that bone to pick.
I just think I see so many people on Twitter and social media gaslighting what he is doing, and I just think they're totally missing. They're just totally off focus. These are all paid bots or Chinese bots that are making way too big a deal over everything that he says, and he's not. He's not the problem. You know, the problem is the virus. We beat the virus. We get the economy start to open back up. And 3 or 4 months from now, nobody will even remember who this guy was.
Well, Easter is a time for new beginnings. So tomorrow, by the way, for those who don't know, tomorrow we will get the press briefings have become like part of our culture now, Tim, right? But tomorrow we'll get a very important one, and Trump will talk about his reopening. I will also, before we get off the Sunday show topic, because we did have a discussion about this last week, how the Democratic governors would resist these new guidelines. If you watched Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace, I believe, the mayor of DC was on, and her opinion, what she said, is more widespread than people would think. And what she was saying to Chris Wallace, because Chris Wallace said, the president is going to have this press conference on Tuesday. They're going to talk about opening this up. And when they do, what are you going to listen to the guidelines? And she made it very clear that she wants to resist that until at least June. So, I don't.
She can say whatever she wants to, but when the CDC comes out with new guidelines, none of the states are going to resist it. And if she tries to resist it, she'll just get way too much pushback.
Oh, they're going to. I mean, she's not the only one. Ralph Northam, Governor Whitmore, the governor in Illinois. You know what's going to change
they're
that,
following
though, Tim?
They're following the CDC guidelines. And when the CDC comes out with new guidelines sometime in May, the states will follow that also. Northam will say we're adjusting our June 1 shutdown date to whatever the new date is. And, these state governors are not going to ignore updated guidelines from the CDC.
Right. And you said, though, sometime in May. So sometime in May, I mean, and by the way, the CDC director is no ally of Donald Trump's. So that's another reality. But sometime in May, Donald Trump is trying to do this before, or at least he's trying to get the ball rolling.
He's laying the groundwork to get things to open up in early May.
Right.
So,
right.
If we get a week into May and the CDC puts out new guidelines, believe me, the pressure on them will be to adjust their guidelines based on new data that they get at the end of the month from the success that all the mitigation efforts will show. And they're not going to not adjust their guidelines. They're not going to say, okay, now we need to limit gatherings to 5 people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to adjust their guidelines based on the new data that they get at the end of the month.
Yeah, that was just to pop in here because I don't know how much we're going to spend on this, but Where was that one? Boy, I wanted to answer that question real quick, but yeah, ventilators. That somebody wrote that they read a story about how ventilators can do more harm than good. Once you're put on the ventilator, and it's a bad sign, and the longer you're on it, the more you degenerate. Is the sad reality there? And the evidence on hydroxychloroquine, Tim, is pretty clear now, or at least it's getting clearer, that it has more effect when you have it early. If you
Well, of
get
course.
put on a ventilator,
Well,
right?
just like any medication
And
would,
that
once
was
you get to the point where you're in really dire
exactly,
straits,
yeah.
there's very little that's going to help,
That's what
you
like
know. And
Governor DeSantis said yesterday. If you're already
right,
knocking on death's door, it's too late. But
right.
in the beginning, there was a lot of resistance for, sadly, what looked to be political reasons, and unfortunately, that's just something that people had to learn the hard way. It's terrible, but yeah, I there are a couple more guys, and we'll get back to them. It's already 10:30, so I wanted to have Tim tell us what's going on here, but I'll go back and I'll read them while Tim's doing them to see if we missed anything. But yeah, tell us what's going on here, Tim, and then we're gonna get after this. We'll get into. I probably will do Michigan first. All right, and then we'll go from there. Okay, because we keep getting squished with these voter analysis. It runs right through. You could burn right through the time trying to show people stuff, and so I'm gonna try early. I got yelled at by a couple of people on Thursday, and they were like, "You start those too late, and you don't get it done." So yeah, Michigan's gonna be cool. I want people to check it out, and I'm gonna show them what polling from last time said. But let me let you do your thing.
So look, the market average 1.5 to 2%, but you got to keep in mind that we had 10 to 13% gains last week. I certainly wouldn't at all be surprised to see, the three major averages, Dow, S&P, NASDAQ, all contract maybe 3 or 4% over the first couple days this week. It's going to be just as important to look at what the internals are of the market. And bear with me just 1 second, but so really the advanced declines are negative by about 3.5 to 1. Again, we had two nearly 10 to 1 advanced decline days last week. We had two 90% up volume days last week. You've got to expect that the market's going to consolidate those gains. We're at the beginning of earnings season, although this is probably an earnings season where it's going to be very inconsequential because everybody knows that their guidance is really not really very relevant unless it gets into specifics about how the virus is affecting their operations. And there's so many unknowns going out into the second half of the year that the earnings are just clearly secondary to the market really looking at data on the virus as much as it's looking on just where the market is technically. And short term, technically, we had a very, very, very sharp rally last week. We've got to consolidate those gains for a few days.
Before like late March, when we had those real bad losses, those the string of a week almost where we had those that was the week where you had like Goldman and others coming out and saying corporate earnings could be really bad. So isn't this really baked in at this point? I mean,
sure.
Yeah.
Even Goldman this morning came out and said, look, second quarter GDP could be down 30%, yeah. But they're still calling for the S&P 500 to hit 3,000 by the end of the year. And they're coming out basically saying something that we forecasted a couple of weeks ago, that the March lows are very likely going to hold. I mean, that stretch in March from March 18th to March 23rd, when you had 2 days where the Dow closed below 20,000.
Right.
And you had the S&P close below what had been the late December 2018 lows for 2 days. We think those lows are going to hold. We're 25% off those lows right now on the S&P 500. So, I mean, we could take a sell-off of, 5, 6, 8% this week and still be in really good shape.
Yeah, because right. And as more, as time rolls on, and we'll see what the president says tomorrow, but as time rolls on and things, I don't want to say get better. I don't know how long it'll take before they get better, but we'll be at least starting to return, or at least try and make a plan to return to normalcy. Then, anything like Tim said, if we lose 5, 6, 7%, the way these markets have been swinging, Tim, they could be back by Thursday. I mean, it's just
right.
It's just the way it is. All right. So I want to get into Michigan here. It's 10:35. And just to tee this up, for those who follow me, you know that I think Donald Trump won Michigan, the state of Michigan, for the first time since 1984 or 1988.
88.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Herbert Walker Bush won it the first time. And it has been a bit of fool's gold for Republican presidential candidates ever since. And I've made the argument for years. I've been arguing that if you looked at Minnesota, that Minnesota on the presidential level was almost never touched by they almost never made an effort for it, but it was a few points, several points, most times than not, more Republican on the presidential level with the presidential vote preference than Michigan was. And Republican candidates were dumping money and time and resources into Michigan that they weren't dumping into Minnesota. And I have long made the case, and now Minnesota has changed, over the years. There's just no doubt about it. Once upon a time, it was more white than Michigan, which was part of my thinking behind that. But it also it depended on the candidate. George W. Bush in 2000 was much more of a nationalist, Tim. He had a more economic populist message before 9/11. So he was a little bit better tailor-made for a state like Minnesota. And then also the drop off of Ross Perot, who had a lot of white support in that area. That's concentrated for his support in the Midwest. A lot more of it was, of course, in the West and the South. But anyway, it was a heavy lift for any Republican to win the state of Michigan. And Donald Trump was uniquely tailored to do that, but he only won it by 10,000 votes. I'm going to show you what it looked like in 2016 compared to, and what we polled it at, and then show you the voter file. Republicans have made a lot of gains in Michigan, just in straight up voter registration and self-identification. The problem is that those independents swing. They went hard against Republicans in 2018, and you saw the damage Republicans, with the exception of John James, Tim. He ran a closer than expected race out there against Tammy Baldwin. She wound up getting.
John James ran against. You're confusing.
Not Tammy Baldwin.
Right.
Stabenow. Yeah,
Debbie Stabenow.
Yeah, Debbie Stabenow.
And she had very, very weak candidates in her prior to elections.
And she did, though, in the end, what helped her out is that she did get Hillary Clinton-sized turnout in, Democratic strongholds, Wayne. And then, of course, we saw like Michigan's 8th congressional district. You had Alyssa Slotkin run a very strong race against Mike Bishop. And she made inroads in places like where she's from, Holly, which is out in Oakland. And that's a red county, but it was like pink against Alyssa Slotkin. So she really ran it up in places like Ingham. Lost, of course, in Livingston, which is a Republican stronghold in that district, but did well enough in Oakland County, which is in that district. It's the northern part of Oakland County. She did well enough there because she played the hometown hero, routine. She did well enough there. And of course, anytime you have congressional candidates running solid races in your state, It benefits top of the ticket people. Well, not anytime, but a lot of times it can, especially in an election where there's a national mood. So that the eighth, by the way, is one that Republicans are going to have to win back. Alyssa Slotkin has a huge war chest, but Donald Trump won that district by, I think, about 8 points. If he really wanted to buffer himself statewide, a 12-point margin out in a district like that would definitely help. But let's take a look first here, Tim.
I think the 11th also in Michigan is one that flipped. And Haley Stewart has now won that race. And I would think that she's beatable also, although I know nothing about what candidates are running against her.
Well, that's one of the biggest problems Republicans have this cycle. Their bench is not strong. You know, you and I have talked about the 8th a lot. Yep. You need Alyssa Slotkin, like I said before, ran as like a hometown hero kind of thing. Her running her business out in the farm in Holly. She ran as a moderate and talked about healthcare. I don't endorse anybody. That's not my job. But I will say that I do think Mike is a stronger candidate than Paul, because Paul is not a hometown person. And she's going to run that same playbook as she did in 2018. And I think the only way, getting labeled a carpetbagger is worth a few points. It is. And if Republicans have a swing back to them in that state, Tim, I can see a carpetbagger effect result in a Slotkin +1, +2 victory. I really can. And also Republicans suffered from turnout in Livingston County, and they need to run it up there. With Trump at the top of the ticket, people are going to vote, of course, but if they want to flip that seat and take it back from Slotkin, they need to get their bench organized. I really think Mike Dittmer is a stronger candidate with help and money. He's a stronger candidate than somebody like Paul Young. I do. So anyway, let's get into this voter file. Let's share the screen. Get you guys, make sure you can see it. Should probably zoom in maybe one more. Let's take a look at Michigan. So here's Michigan, a little over 7 million. And we'll look at the map. When it's close for me like this, Tim, it makes it easier for other people to see, but it's like really close on my end. People are going to be stunned by this. This is inference here. Okay. Let me just check to make sure that all of them are picked. Right. So they're all picked. This is inference. Like we talked about before, the difference. It is very accurate. But in Michigan, just a quick disclaimer, you're going to be shocked by how it's a traditionally blue state, how strong Republicans look when you just run a simple voter analysis, okay, which we'll do with our usual defaults. It's the independent vote. And this is why I want to show you what it looks like when we poll it. It's totally different. I got the breakdown up from 2016 polling. I'll show you guys how different it looks. Look at this, Tim. There's actually like a 3-point advantage for Republicans in this when you just run this through the modeling. Okay. And there's a huge 3 and 10, a huge unknown. Now, this is big even in polling, but when we poll it, Democrats have a much bigger advantage. And I'll show you the exit polls too. It'll take me a second to flip back and forth, but I'll show you the exit polls and you will see that Democrats much, much stronger than it looks like from here. So right here, you think, well, what is this even a battleground state for? If Donald Trump wins independence, then he's going to carry this state. But in the other states, when we, tightened up that voter model, like I showed you last week, in most instances, Republicans gain in a base edge. In this state, that doesn't happen. In fact, there are what we used to call them Reagan Democrats, Tim. Remember? There are a lot of white working class independents too, but Democrats that have really clung to their Democratic tradition. Okay. And they may not self-identify when you call them, but we know where they are. And we know that they were key to Trump winning because they hung tight and they just were holding off and holding off. The electorate in Michigan last time was about D+8. And let me see if I can actually show them that real quick, Tim. Let me end this screen share real quick, okay? And let me pull up another one. because in Michigan in 2016, Democrats had a solid edge, just like they did in 2012, and that is because of the voter model. There are more Democrats in Michigan. The
Definitely.
modeling there are the modeling takes them, a lot of them, as independents. But what is important to remember with what I just showed you is that's about almost a 4-point increase from the base that was represented by the Republican Party in 2016. So there are still, just base to base, Republicans have made a good deal of inroads there. It's just that, those independents they're swinging. Let's look at the exit polls first. I'll just pull up CNN's exit polls. Here's the party ID. Okay, it was 40% Democrats, 31% Republicans. That's more like what an electorate turns out to be in Michigan. Okay, and then like Donald Trump, he did what he had to do here. Just out, Tim. I have to show people this, how close this was when we polled this state, and why it can be very difficult to get Michigan correctly. So this is a spreadsheet. A lot of the stuff we do through PPD, when you go onto the website and there's maps and tables, a lot of this is through a spreadsheet. This is the actual spreadsheet that had the top lines for the map in 2016. This is the very last one we did. You could see the change. We always did, what was the change before? It was Clinton +2 on the second, but it wasn't because she had such a huge edge. It was because of those independents, Tim. And then come November 6th, it was Trump +1, which was really more like 0.6 or 5 or something, but it rounds up. And this is what changed here. And just so everybody sees the breakdown, our breakdown was 31 Republican, 38 Democrat, a little bit different than the exit polls, which was 40, and independent was 31. They had independents at 29 in the exit polls, okay? Trump consolidated these guys at the last minute. I mean, it was the last minute, and there's still, you can see, third parties, third party vote here. But these are, I would say, they're older, whiter voters, Tim. They voted for Barack Obama. This is what helped Trump flip so many of those counties. And it was them. And they were hanging back because every president has to meet like a bar, I guess, like a presidential bar. People have to say, okay, this guy can do the job, right? I may not even like him. And in the case of Donald Trump, in the Midwest, his favorables were better than they were in the rest of the country. It's 42-52, if people can see that. I know it's hard probably to see, but 42% favorable, 52% unfavorable going into that election. But I know other pollsters had different results. We had Hillary Clinton at 37 in this state, Tim. She was not well liked in Michigan at all. Some of that, I imagine, was trade, and some of it was just Hillary Clinton. She did lose a pretty nice chunk of her base to Donald Trump. And I'm not sure what the exit polls gave Trump. 9. Looks like we're giving him we gave him 11, but he only lost 7% according to the exit polls. We had him only losing like 5% of his own base. And then, of course, he clobbered her among these independents in this state. And it was within the last few days. We talked to the after the election, the Detroit Business Journal. They were doing an article on polling in Michigan and what happened. And so this sheet is, like I said, it's old, but we showed them in the Epoch Times the trend over the few days. And it was just incredible how he was keeping it tight because he was getting more crossover than her, right? So it was like Clinton +2, Clinton +3. And then when those independents moved, they moved so sharply for Donald Trump. He's absolutely going to need two things to carry the state again. One, he's going to need a similar electorate. If it's anything, if there's any larger advantage for a Democrat, it's going to be very difficult for him to win that state. Yeah, we didn't do Pennsylvania yet.
It was very highly publicized also that even the local Democrats on the ground in Michigan were trying to get the Hillary Clinton team in Brooklyn
Right.
to pay more attention there, because they could sense as much as a month out that the enthusiasm for her, even among Democrats, was extremely low.
Right. And we saw in Wayne County how bad that hurt her, right? So just for people who don't know, I'll share it now, but Detroit, Wayne County, Democrats this time around are going to make a play like Macomb, for instance, Tim. Some of these areas that Donald Trump either flipped, some of these counties, or brought so close, where Mitt Romney and John McCain, they really couldn't touch that. This time around, Joe Biden's strategy, despite what you hear from the media, his strategy will not be to try to win the class of a voter that Donald Trump appeals to, the working class, for instance. They say Biden has that appeal, but really he is going to try and win educated whites in and around places like Oakland, all right, especially the southern part. And if I can zoom in here, I can show people the southern part of Oakland is really it. So the northern part, like I said before, is in the 8th, and that is a traditional Republican area. I probably went the other way. That's a traditional Republican area. They're going to try wrong way, Rich. They're going to try.
You got to blow that up a lot more.
Yeah, it's coming. 150 almost million. It just takes time. I went the other way again, didn't I? Yep. All right, it's coming. There we go. It'll get closer. I don't want to blow it too close because there we go. Let's move it over now. It lags a little bit, folks. I mean, the database is huge. Look at the gains they're making here, Tim, right? Democrats, I'm talking about. This right here is where Biden's going to try to win this state. Okay. Let's say Trump does, is about as well as he did in the rest of the state, right? He won basically, he just ran it up. Biden is going, this is the 8th district Tim and I were just talking about. It cuts northern Ingham. It gets it takes Ingham, but that big blob right there is the Democratic stronghold in this state. Slotkin ran it up here and then kept it relatively tight here. And it goes across right around here. Okay. And that's what's in and encompasses the 8th district. Down here, of course, a lot more Democrats than they used to be. And basically, this is an educated area. They are pretty wealthy up and around here. Rochester Hills, right? That's the name. Yeah, Rochester Hills. This is where Biden's going to try to win this state. Okay. And then Trump did so well out in Macomb, very well. And that was the crossover vote, by the way. It wasn't just that Donald Trump, I could get rid of Democrats and you can see Republicans, for instance. Let's get rid of them. And let's show you that. I mean, there's quite a few Republicans in here, of course, but it was the Democratic crossover that really won it for him there. And Biden is going to try to take away that suburban white woman that still voted for Donald Trump 51, 52% because they didn't like Hillary Clinton and the economy was a big issue. So here's a lot of here. I added independents just to show you guys why when Trump won independents as much as he did. And again, we had it 52 to 37. Exit polls had it 52-36. We were like spot on. That is because he was able to tap a wealth of independents in these areas. And there are more Democrats in the southeastern side of Oakland, southwestern side of Macomb. That's going to be where the state is won and lost. So come election night, when you're trying to figure out where the state goes, where it's going to go, that will be where to look, folks. It's not just Wayne County. What we'll look at in Wayne County, obviously Joe Biden is going to win Wayne County. What we're looking at is how many votes, what is the number of votes that's going to come out of there in the margin. Hillary Clinton got several 10 or 20. If she would have gotten the same number of votes as Barack Obama, she could have potentially carried that state, but she didn't. And that really hurt her. And so this is where this little area right here, that's going to tell us whether or not Donald Trump's going to hang on to this. I don't know if you'd agree with this, Tim, but I think Michigan is the hardest state for Donald Trump to hold on to. And we're going to get to Pennsylvania.
I would agree with that. Yes. Of the states that he won last time. Yes.
Yeah. Of the states that he won. Yeah.
Yes. Because it was very, very, very tight. And Hillary never went there. She had some of her operatives go there very late in the game. And Trump won. That was almost the epitome of why he won overall, was that trade was a huge issue. And immigration was a huge issue. And the two are linked, clearly. But really, trade was a huge issue for Michigan, as it was in Ohio, as it was in 3/4 of Pennsylvania, and as it was in Wisconsin. That's why in the Canada trade deal, the provisions to have the dairy farmers be able to sell milk into Canada is a huge deal for Trump in that state.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. In Wisconsin, right? Yeah, which we got into last week. I mean, we'll circle back and hit a lot of these states again, folks. I mean, we go through these, and it's, I guess at this point, we're just trying to do a touch on the surface for each one.
Now, one other thing I'd love to have you comment on Michigan, just because, I mean, for those of you who don't know, that is my home state, although I haven't lived there for decades. But what about Michigan CD3? Is Justin Amash going to run as an independent?
Well, yeah, he's left the Republican Party.
Right, but is he going to run?
Yeah, I think he would. I think he will. Okay. I mean, we've seen no indication that he won't. And then that's, you would really
think that, I mean, a filing date's got to be coming up, right?
It could. Yeah, it's probably at the. Oh, it's April now. Yeah. I'll have to check that, and I could look. Actually,
it's worth circling back to that, because
during your market break, I'll check that out, because that's actually a district, Tim, that I think Republicans could mess up with and lose, because if they have, I'm not saying Justin Amash is any better than a Democrat on most of these issues now, but if he has a vote split going on out there, Democrats have enough of a base. But what I suspect might happen is that Justin Amash may get a larger than usual share of the Democratic vote, because of what he's, where he's been between going back to the Russia probe. He is the only Republican who entertained that farce. It was a hoax, but he entertained it. The Ukraine, what led to impeachment, the complaint over the president's call with the president of Ukraine. Same thing. So he may get rewarded a bit, like we're seeing almost like a Mitt Romney effect. Mitt Romney's approval rating, for people who don't know, is in the toilet in Utah. This is a man who won, what was it, like 7 in 10 votes out there. And now he's
a very, very, very Republican state, obviously.
Very, very. And he's at, I think, 42% now, or roughly around, which is a drop of 20-something points. And that is because he's bottomed out among Republicans. The only thing keeping Mitt Romney afloat in that state, and I don't mean above water, he's not, is his approval rating among Democrats. A slight majority of Democrats say they approve of the job Mitt Romney is doing, while Republicans have basically almost all but abandoned him. And eventually, the danger, he won't
be up for re-election until 2024.
Yeah,
so
he's got he's got
3.5 years to.
I don't know though that he'll rebuild his relationships with some of the people in DC. He is basically without a friend in certain circles in the Senate. He for the longest time, people were. I mean, I'm sure they still are. They were mad. The Republican senators who have known Mitt Romney for a long time, they were very angry. And 3.5 years is a long time in politics, but when those relationships, at least right now, haven't really showed much. There are other things that the party needs Mitt Romney for. So there's a working relationship there on a host of other issues, but he doesn't have a whole lot of friends. Is where I'm going with this. I would just like to point out here before we go to take our break here. what I'd like to point out again, going back to Michigan 8th, is against somebody like Joe Biden, as long as Joe Biden doesn't completely implode, against somebody like Joe Biden, Donald Trump really needs to squeeze out a lot of votes in areas where maybe Republicans have a built-in let me show them the 8th. Can we? Well, I'll do that when we come back. How about that? And then I'll show them specifically the 8th congressional district and why it was such a ridiculous. I mean, Bishop was he just fell asleep at the wheel, and Republicans cannot afford that if Donald Trump wants to carry this state again. All right. So instead of we'll do the quick break here, Tim, and we'll have you do the markets. Then I'll come back and I'll look at the 8th. It's so important. It really is absolutely crucial to Republicans winning that state. And if you remember, the district has changed. It was changed a few years back. So it's not exactly the same district as when, what's his name? Rogers, right? He used to run it out there. Mike Rogers, I believe it was. And he used to win that district by 20 points. I mean, it was a ridiculous blowout. Those are the kind of margins, not even 20, but Republicans need to put up
the 8th
in places like that.
I thought Bishop had been the incumbent for a while.
He was the incumbent. He took over for, I believe, I'm like 98% sure that it's Mike Rogers. And then when he retired, Bishop took over, and Bishop handily won re-election. He handily won it. And then
Mike Rogers had been there for a while, so
yeah, he did.
I think I think that he must have been. He must be from a different district. I'm going to look it up right now.
And it's a slightly different district now than it was. Okay, there, Shiawassee, I think it is, was part of. If I'm saying that right, Tim, you're the native Michigander, but that was part of the 8th district for a while, and it was Republican area. County. The county, it was the southern part of Shiawassee. It was the southern part of that county, was part of the 8th at one point. It's not anymore. So it's not exactly the same. But when we come back, I'll show you exactly how much of a advantage Republicans have there, because it's not a state they should have lost. And if they want to take back the House, they got, Slotkin is ripe to do that. She's underwater in that district right now. She's highly unpopular. There's a lot of problems, bench issues, or choosing the right candidates in a lot, not just that, but a lot of these races for Republicans. And if Trump wants that state, they need a coherent, unified, top of the ticket to bottom of the ticket kind of message. So, all right, let's do this. I blew right over the spiel the first time. If you guys are watching on Facebook Live, like on Facebook Live, like the page, like PPD. If you're on Periscope, follow. It's running on both accounts again. Follow either me or PPD or both. Give us those hearts. All those metrics matter. If you're on YouTube and you haven't subscribed, absolutely subscribe. So building a YouTube show and YouTube channel from the ground up, subscriptions matter. They can actually count that to, some of the stuff that you can do on it. So subscribe to it. And then the ultimate way to support the show is to subscribe to PPD. So it's ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. We're going to have our top of the hour market update here from Tim. Tell us what's going on, Tim.
So markets right now are pretty much at their lows of the day. The averages are down between 2 and 2.5%. The Dow's off a little over 500 points. That sounds like a lot. Just keep in mind, it was up almost 13% last week. You've also got some profit taking in the precious metals. Gold ran into a lot of resistance at the $1,800 level. Hasn't been there for 7 years. And so gold is trading around 1745. Silver's off a little bit also. Oil is off a little bit, kind of on a sell on the news reaction to the headlines of the oil deal between really the Saudis, Russia, and the U.S. played a big part in that also. Combined cuts of 10 million barrels a day. Some people were hoping for as many as 15 million. I think there could be some further action toward more cuts down the road. But we just have to see how that plays out over the next 3 to 6 weeks. Again, it's only 11 o'clock. We're an hour and a half into the trading day. I'm not really putting a whole lot of concern into the sell-off that we see so far this morning.
All right. So, what are some of the big movers out there? We got anything what's driving this decline? Where is it coming from?
I think it's coming from everywhere. I mean, it's coming from, you've got the banks off a little bit. You've got a lot of the stocks that in the travel and hotel industry that had rallied sharply last week, probably a little bit of short covering. And you just had a very sharp rally last week. You're almost always going to see some profit taking and some consolidation for a day or two after that.
All right, guys. If I say it right, let me know I said it right. Okay. Shiawassy. Is that right?
That sounds pretty close.
They were like writing how it's pronounced. Because when you do this, when you're in my business, you better get it right. So if you go to like a state like Missouri and you say Missouri or Nevada instead, Nevada, Nevada versus Nevada, you try to get these right. Yeah, so you said closer. Yes. All right. So I'm getting closer. I did bring up basically, Tim, a dossier because we were talking about the vote shares in the 8th district that we're going to talk about. It was Mike Rogers. That's who it is.
He was.
Yep. He won
from 2001 to 2015, and he must have not run for maybe did he must have not run for re-election in 16 because I believe that Bishop was the incumbent.
That's when Bishop was the incumbent. Here, going back to 2008, and let's see if people can see this. So going back, we do a lot on Google stuff. It's just pretty easy. Going back to 2008, Mike Rogers won that district, which is a different, like I said, it's a different.
I think it was redistricted did Michigan redistrict in 10?
Yeah, I think go back
2010. They had a redistricting. They might have lost one rep after the 10 census.
I can go back and look. We do this kind of analysis on all of these like top target districts, and that's what I pulled up instead of going back to the voter file right away. This is all from the voter files anyway, and from historical vote shares. But Rogers in 08, he won it by 16.3%. We go up again. Look at that margin, Tim. In
but it was a different district. It was a different district in 8 than it is now.
It absolutely was. And actually here, I can bring this up and we can see exactly what changed, because this is always here. If a district has changed recently, then we'll note that. I mean, it matters. All right. So, right. Shiawassy, right? Used to be, like I said, part of the district, and it was the only pivot county. A pivot county is what we call it. Pivot. Everybody's different. That's like a battleground county, right? It used to include southern portions of Shiawassy, Tim, and the northern. Now it's still, the northern Oakland is still in there, but now it's just Livingston, Ingham, and the northern section of Oakland County. And then this is how she won it. This is her whole background. We'll basically put together dossiers for these people, right? So she won it by just under 4 points against Mike Bishop. And you can see while we go through a couple of these, take note of the actual vote total. And then you're going to see what happened here to Mike Bishop. He fell asleep. He really fell asleep. This is how many votes Mike Bishop won in 2016 when he clobbered Susanna in this district. He clobbered her. Again, and you're going to see, by the way, huge chunk of independents. That's how a Democrat can win this thing. They have to run up their margins in Ingham County, which is their stronghold. That's the only stronghold in the 8th congressional district for a Democrat. They run up those margins there. They keep it tight in Oakland, which is a pink county. This section is pink.
So that's the eastern half. Ingham's got to be the eastern half of Lansing.
Lansing. That's right. It's East Lansing. Yep, exactly right. And I'll show that in a second. We got some pretty cool maps in this dossier, if I remember correctly. And then, again, Mike Bishop, he did very well. This was another very good Republican year. He won that by about the same margin, just a little bit shy of what Rogers he fell asleep. I don't know how else to put it, right? I mean, that's the best way to put it, Tim. Even Republicans lost the state and lost the presidential election this year, and Mike Rogers still did very well. Won 50, almost 59% of the vote. But this is at this point, this is when Shiawassee was part of it. So it's not anymore. So we are talking, it's important to understand we're talking about different districts. Here's the vote share. And we do this. It's just a pretty neat little analysis we'll run. The solid line is how much of the two-party vote that the candidates actually got, whether it was a Republican candidate, not just necessarily, whether it's Rogers or Bishop. These are the vote shares they've gotten over the years in solid. The light color is about there. It's a way to calculate an average. All right. And then the last one is about what you could expect them to get in a regular year. You can see here that Slotkin got about, a decent size share of the vote more than you would have expected or you would have, predict. And then of course Bishop ran very poorly, way under where he should have ran or where we would have expected him to. Couple of things factored for this. She ran up those margins in Ingham, which is part one of how you win in this county if you're a Democrat. And then he got clobbered among what is a very large chunk of independent voters. All right. So this is about, this is going to be still pretty close. This is a huge advantage for Republicans in this district. They're 39%. They start at 39% of the vote. And I'll run this in the voter file because the voter file has been updated since then. It's updated monthly. And then the Democrats are only about, I think now though, Tim, they're more, but they're still a very inferior share. But this unaffiliated block here, more than 4 in 10 voters, is a lot. And Bishop just kind of ignored them. They overwhelmingly cared about healthcare. That was their top issue in 2018. And they voted very heavily for Elissa Slotkin. So coupled with that, how well she did getting her vote out in Ingham, and then how badly Bishop did getting his vote out in Livingston, just did him in.
And I would throw in there that you probably have a much larger than normal chunk of unaffiliated voters in Michigan, because I believe they run open primaries in Michigan. So you do not need to put a party affiliation next to your name when you register to vote. So that means that you can have much larger block of unaffiliated voters than in states where you have to have a party ID next to your name to vote in the primary.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And by the way, before we run over Michigan, I have got to address the importance of Bernie Sanders when it comes down to this two-party, because Bernie, this time around, Tim and I have talked about this on the show before. Bernie did so poorly compared to 2016 this time around. It's pretty clear from our analysis. What we have found is that there is a Bernie vote. What used to be Bernie's vote is now almost a Trump vote. I mean, there's a section that he lost from 2016. If you go back and compare how well he did against Hillary Clinton, where he did well compared to her, she won the urban centers. He won the working class and rural areas. That was flipped this time in a lot of these other areas. In Iowa, Pete Buttigieg, he won the more rural areas in Iowa. In New Hampshire, again, Pete Buttigieg and even Amy Klobuchar did very well in those areas. Bernie won it in the big population centers. Same thing. Well, Nevada, Bernie creamed everybody there. And then you get to his losses on Super Tuesday. And in Michigan, while we're talking about it, is another great example. Bernie pulled out a surprise win in Michigan against Hillary Clinton. It was one of the biggest polling blunders in history.
I think she was up by 8 points, wasn't she?
I mean, ridiculous. And some, in the average, you're probably thinking about, because in some of these polls, it was even more than that. I mean, it's just crazy.
Right.
It was like no chance. I mean,
right.
The idea that this was going to be close when nobody would have told you that. In the end, Bernie squeaked it out by a couple of points, and he did so by carrying what are typically Republican counties in a general election, but that vote abandoned him this time around. And he has been so critical of, not only that he's critical of Donald Trump, the issues where they had synergy and overlap, Bernie flip-flopped on immigration, trade, the Second Amendment,
Right.
all of this stuff that Bernie once, was very feasible to a working class voter who was otherwise in sync with Donald Trump on a lot of these issues, or even some of the others in the Republican Party. Because he took that route, these voters left him. In 2016, they were crucial to Donald Trump winning this state. We would ask, how did you vote in the primary? For whom did you vote? It was between 12 to upwards of 18% in a state like Michigan that would break off from Bernie Sanders and cross over and vote for Donald Trump. I still have some of the comments in my mind, Tim. A one who called herself moderately liberal, and we would give people, if they responded online, which in 2016 everything was online panels. I will never forget one of the comments from an undecided voter who called herself moderately liberal, and she was a Bernie voter, and she was an independent, even though she called herself, ideologically moderately liberal.
Right.
And she chose at the very end, because we've sent out those surveys and we said, this is it. You must pick. If you had to, and we're bending your arm right now, who are you going to vote for? And she picked Donald Trump. And when I read over her comment, I will never forget this woman's comment. She said, at least I know what I'm going to get with Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton cannot, you just cannot be trusted. She cannot be trusted on any issue. She will flip-flop. And for this woman, which was funny, she was a suburban, moderately liberal woman. And she chose Donald Trump because of authenticity. And she was a Bernie voter because of authenticity. And then there were, when we got into her response, her specific responses, trade and immigration were viewed as economic issues. Donald Trump did a very good intertwined economic issues. So immigration in Michigan, at least with our panel, could not be separated from the issue of the economy. And even women, suburban, educated women, were thinking along those lines. That was the narrative that Donald Trump framed that election, and it worked, is my point. It worked. So anyway, getting back to the 8th, which is important, all around, for instance, here, all around this area, even up in here, Bernie did very well in 2016. They went for Joe Biden out in those areas this time. That's how badly Bernie miscalculated, basically. And now a lot of this is just going to be a Trump vote. In the ABC Washington Post poll, Tim, they found 16%, I believe it was a crossover vote. And they even mentioned that in their polling, the previous election cycle, that wasn't that high in their polling. It was for ours. We had routinely seen those numbers, but they didn't. And now, that's a warning sign for Joe Biden, which is why you're seeing him trying to make these overtures to Bernie's voters. But in a place like Livingston, and we're getting back to talking about Bishop, this is where Alyssa Slotkin is from. She's from out here in Holly, and she played the hometown favorite. Bishop's vote down here was horrible in and around Livingston. It was terrible, and they cannot afford that again. And that's why I get back to, for people who don't know, there's actually there's more than 2 candidates out there. It's just that, I not to dog anybody, it's just the way I see it. There's only 2 really viable Republican candidates. Paul Young has money to throw into the race. The other one is not well funded, but he has a lot of endorsements that from the president's supporters, like Sheriff David Clark, and so on and so forth. He's got the conservative vote. Another reason, Tim, why I think Mike is so strong, would run strong. Mike Dittmer is the other candidate.
Yep.
The reason why I think he'd run so strong is Mike is from Oakland. Okay, so he went to school in Oakland. Right. Now he lives in Livingston. So he's got like a twofold story there. Whereas Paul left and moved out of state and had lived out of state for many, many years, and then just came back to the 8th, a few months
Right.
before he decided to run.
Yeah.
She's going to label him a carpetbagger over here.
Yeah.
And that's going to help her just as far as vote preference goes. And then down in Livingston, it'll probably depress it, because this is salt. These are salt of the earth people here, folks. Tim, speak to this area a little bit. You're from out in Michigan. I mean, these are salt of the earth people right here.
Yes,
and they have to feel that you're genuine, right? I mean, can you speak a little bit about this area?
And you've got, look, it's part of Oakland County. I think maybe the higher population parts of Oakland County are a little bit further east. And of course, going back to when Reagan won Michigan had always been a strongly Democratic state, although it had a couple of moderate Republican governors. But when Reagan won there in 80 and 84, and I'm sure there were people studying political science who probably wrote their PhDs on the Reagan Republicans in Macomb County, which is just, north of Detroit, a lot of auto workers. And those are really very high paid blue collar jobs. I think the reality is today, the demographics of Macomb County have changed quite a bit. Yeah, and a lot of what you would have considered to be Reagan Republicans 40 years ago, really that has slid over into a good chunk of Oakland County.
You can see that bleed, actually.
Yes. Folks, and I think that what Trump did, I remember looking at it. I haven't looked at it for a few years, but I remember looking at it after the 2016 election. And what Trump did was that he won Macomb County, he lost Oakland County, but the combination of those two was almost a dead heat. He played Macomb and Oakland County to a dead heat.
That's exactly right. You're right on.
And that was really a huge deal for him. Macomb County has always been, the Republicans have always tried to play that as an area where they could get a lot. They could do very well with independents, and they could get some significant Democrat crossover votes. When John Engler was a 2-term governor of Michigan, it was definitely an upset when he won his first race there. And he won that first race by winning Macomb County. Now that was a little bit after Reagan, but still that was what they called those Reagan Democrats in Macomb County. That concept has slid over into Oakland County. And then the whole space between Oakland County and the eastern part of Lansing is very rural. So, I mean, a lot of that could be central to western Pennsylvania outside, except for Pittsburgh and the suburbs.
Right. And that's what you were talking about before, how it's changed over the years. Macomb here, what Tim was talking about, because Macomb is so important. What Tim was talking about right here, this is an area where, again, this is where Joe Biden, where I'm making a little circle right here, is going to try and win those more metro-like burbs areas. They're more educated. Oakland down here, and you can already see, talking about bleed, you can already see where the Democrats are in the 8th congressional district. And just so everybody knows, there are little dots all over the place, even though that doesn't, this area is not in the 8th. There are little dots everywhere because perhaps their voting address, it's just how it is on the voter file itself. It is possible for somebody to live up here but still be eligible to vote in another district. Perhaps they're a recent mover, they changed, or what have you. But just so people don't get confused, the actual border of the congressional district goes like this and is around. But when it comes to the presidential election, Donald Trump, like Tim said, he won Macomb County, and I'm going to give you a little list of counties and why that mattered too. And then with Oakland, which overall goes Democratic. This area, when you break it out of the 8th, this area right here will be Republican, even though it was pretty much light pink with Bishop, but the entire county will be Democratic. All right, just so everybody understands that. All right, so
because the county slides over into some really areas of just kind of maybe the southern end of Pontiac, and then also northern parts of a couple of the Detroit suburbs. But those parts of Oakland County, I believe, are not in the 8th district.
We are talking now. Yeah, right. That's in the southern part. At that point, it cuts off. When we actually have talked to people in Oakland, even polling people, Tim, there is a lot of mentions when we talk about local issues that Detroit seems to be bleeding into their county a little bit.
Yeah,
sure. And they don't. There's a lot of people who just don't like it. Right. But that's the way. That's progress, folks. So just so people have a background, in 2016 in Michigan, Trump carried 12 counties that voted not just once but twice for Barack Obama. So he voted 12 counties that Barack Obama won when he was running for re-election. That includes, but not limited to, Monroe, Bay, Eaton, Saginaw, and Macomb. And why Macomb is so important, like Tim was talking about, is if Republicans want to win Michigan, they must fight Macomb and Oakland to a draw, because they're going to lose Oakland, they're going to lose Wayne, but they cannot lose Macomb County too. So voter turnout, and this helped Trump so much. This was huge for him. Voter turnout in Macomb increased 4%, all right, as a share of the statewide vote. So from 4 years before, and then taking that with how well he did it, in traditional Republican areas, and then Clinton not really running it up in Wayne. I mean, the damage to her, Tim, from not getting out that vote in Wayne just was so bad. She only won 8 counties in the state of Michigan. How do you say it, Tim? Genesee, Ingham,
Genesee. Well, Genesee would be Flint.
Okay.
So Flint is obviously going to be a very Democratic county.
Say it one more time for me, just so I get it right.
Genesee.
Like,
you got to think Genesee ale.
Kalamazoo, she won. Marquette, she won. She won Oakland, like I said. Wayne, of course. Washtenaw, and Muskegon, whatever.
Muskegon.
Yeah, and anyway, that was it. 8 counties. So that only gave Donald Trump a 10,000 vote win. If he loses Macomb, he's going to lose the state. That's the point I'm trying to make. She came out with a 290,000 vote lead in Wayne, which was about almost, I think when all the votes were counted, Tim, it was like less than 80,000 votes, about 78 or 80,000 votes less than Obama got in Wayne, and even less than what John Kerry got in 2004. That just illustrates how badly she did in Wayne County.
The population could be down a little bit.
In
Detroit.
But if you look at John James in 2018, his first Senate race, he actually did really well in that area. Where he fell short, two reasons he fell short. One, Stabenow got Hillary Clinton-like turnout in Democratic areas. And two, John James did not get the entire Trump vote. He didn't. And it was not enough. Losing that vote, not just the vote share, but the number of votes. She was able, Stabenow, she was able to crank out as much as Hillary Clinton did in the strongholds for Democrats. But he was not able to get not only the share, but the number of votes that Trump got out of some of these areas. And it wasn't enough to offset how much better he did in a place like Wayne, for instance, Tim.
Right.
He did so much better, but it's not enough. You have got to get your base vote out, especially in a midterm. I mean, that's true of all. That's true of all elections. And then again, I think it was 53. I had written about this at the time when it happened. about 53,000 votes less than Kerry got Hillary Clinton in Wayne, and Trump squeezed out about 15,000 or 20,000 more votes than Mitt Romney did. So, I mean, in that area. So,
well, I think for James, this will be a very, very interesting year because he ran he ran in 16 for Senate against Stabenow, who is quite popular in Michigan, even though I frankly kind of view her as just, borderline empty suit. I mean, she's not terribly impressive anytime you see her in front of a camera. She was a state representative. She's been involved in Michigan politics probably for 30 years. This was his very first entree into any type of political endeavor. And he came much, much closer than either of, I think he lost by 6 or 7 points. He did much better than either of her prior two candidates. Now, this time he's running against Gary Peters, who's the other senator from Michigan, who does not have the background, the track record, or probably even the name recognition across the state that Stabenow does. And given that it's Wayne's second time, it's James's second time around, I haven't seen polling on it, but I just get the impression he's got a real shot here.
Well, he did in the last quarter, outraised Gary Peters, which doesn't
Since you're speaking of fundraising, I just saw a headline that Trump and the RNC raised $212 million in Q1.
Whoa.
That sounds like a lot to me.
Actually, yeah, here's the email that I'll have to go over that. We actually do track that too. Here's one from the RNC because we get these emails. And then here's I don't know if you probably can't see the screen, but this is from the Trump campaign and they're boasting. And 212 million in the first quarter. And they have $240 million cash on hand.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. That is I'd have to go back and look at Barack Obama's. That's way more than Barack Obama had at this point. I mean, that's a lot of money. And they're also saying that the Trump victory has over 880,000 volunteers trained, and they've made over 17 million voter contacts just since March 13th.
Yeah, they say at least 3 times as many volunteers. I think it's probably more like 5 or 6 times as many.
I mean, Tim,
they were saying 3 times as many in Q4 last year. And it's a little bit curious to me throughout this whole, except for at the very beginning of the coronavirus outbreak. Obviously, Bloomberg dropped out of the race. Very disappointing performance.
Horrible.
He gave, he had $18 million in some fund. He gave it to the DNC, not to the Joe Biden campaign.
He bailed on them. We did an article on that.
I can't remember a 2-month stretch anytime in the last 20 years where you've heard less from Mike Bloomberg than you've heard over the last 2 months. Well, let's say the last 6 weeks.
When
was it he dropped out? He dropped out after Super Tuesday. Was it after Super Tuesday, or did he go one more week?
It was after Super Tuesday. It wasn't long.
So that was early March.
Yeah. And if you look, probably one of the reasons why he's disappearing, if you look, and we did a story on this, Bloomberg broke really a promise to the campaign. Like Tim had just said, he promised
to keep all of his staff employed through
That's right.
the election. And so a lot of people felt that what he was going to do was he was going to keep he was going to turn it into a super PAC to support and promote whoever the eventual nominee was. But I have to think that when he made all those statements, he always felt that if it wasn't going to be him, it would be someone other than Joe Biden.
His whole strategy.
And I think I just think he has to view Biden as a lost cause.
Yeah, let's circle back to that, because that's something good to talk about. I'll also bring up a little bit more about what happened with Bloomberg, the promises that he did break, because some of this will matter. Some of these people, they get shuffled around, folks. So this is a detriment to Joe Biden, and so I'll circle back to that. But let's do a quick word here. So if you guys are, again, you're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit, I am the People's Pundit. You can follow me right there at People's_Pundit on Twitter. And if you guys are watching on Periscope, give us the, hit the hearts, follow whichever one you're looking at, or both. It's on mine and at PPD's. I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. You can follow him on Twitter at TJ Anderson1, at TJ Anderson1. And those who are viewing on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to the page, give us a thumb up. And if you hit the bell, then it will notify you when we go live or when we put something else out. All right. And then the ultimate way to support the show. Oh, don't leave out Facebook Live. I don't want to leave out Facebook Live. Like the page on Facebook Live. And if you are, the ultimate way to support the show, if you want to support the show, is to subscribe to PPD. That's ppdnews.us/subscribe, where you will get data for your dollar and stories like the one I'm about to bring up. It's ppdnews.us/subscribe. So it is important to note, I'll give him this, Tim. Bloomberg he paid his staffers, people who were paid staffers, he paid them twice what anybody else was paying them. So they had, and
a lot of the other campaigns were complaining about that.
Yes, because they could not compete with that.
They couldn't retain people that they had, and they couldn't hire additional people that they felt they needed.
And it was a good job, but he had promised to keep them all on throughout through the election. And with Biden, he also promised to create an independent organization like Tim was talking about, and then he was going to dump his leftover campaign resources into that independent organization. That was going to focus on battleground states that Biden had to win, because Biden's campaign is nothing. I mean, he really has no presence. He didn't have the money. Biden is not a good fundraiser. He has not been a very good fundraiser at all. So Bloomberg was going to help him out with this. And then that was going to employ a lot of the people that lost their job when Bloomberg left the race. He reneged on that, and he gave it's not like Trump changed him for people, but in the world of politics and how much Bloomberg had spent.
The world of Mike Bloomberg, it
was not a whole lot at all. It was right. In the world of Mike Bloomberg, I mean, we're talking about a couple $1 million, I think, like maybe 8 or 10.
I think it was $18 million. I think he had $18 million specifically in a campaign fund.
And he gave it to the DNC.
Right.
Instead. And the DNC is broke. We just got these new fundraising numbers. They will go into our tracker if you haven't seen it. And you got to see the DNC. Democrats don't have a legitimate party structure anymore. They basically give to their independent groups. They're doing very well at the congressional level. The DCCC, they're organized differently than Republicans. And this is why you're able to see leadership pull their members the way they do, because Schumer and Pelosi have a tight control over who does and who doesn't get funding. And most of their funds come from big, rich people like Tom Steyer. If you haven't seen that, by the way, go to PPD and look at Wall Street still hedges, but donations, contributions, whatever, have decidedly shifted to Democrats. You'll see the trend. It used to be, Republicans were viewed as the party of big business and Wall Street. That's just not true anymore. Democrats get 2-to-1 donations, and they come from wealthy people typically, and they go in, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, who had actual working support, grassroots support. And it goes into independent expenditure groups or independent PACs, things like, that are supporting a specific candidate. They do not have. Tom Perez is essentially bankrupt over there. He's not a good fundraiser. He doesn't even like it. Rona is a great fundraiser. Rona McDaniel, she's fantastic. That she's always, everybody we talk to, Tim, say she burns the wall. She's on the phone.
And I just gotta think that serious big money people in the business world and in Wall Street, and let's face it, I mean, Wall Street, the C-suite people in Wall Street have always tilted Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean, going back for decades. I mean, Bob
Yeah.
Rubin from Goldman Sachs basically got his job as Treasury Secretary, and he was a very good Treasury Secretary under Clinton because he was the largest single bundler to Bill Clinton's campaign going into 1992. A little bit before your time, but I'm sure you've read about it. And
on the flip side of that,
Jamie Dimon is a career Democrat. There's no doubt about it. Although he stopped maxing out his contribution, I think, after Obamacare passed, because he just had big issues with the not just the Obamacare itself, but the way in which it was handled.
Yeah. But typically they hedge, which is why the title of that was what it was. They still had hedged their bets, because they're, in the end, right, Tim? I mean, they're still going to hedge.
Sure.
I can show people that actually real quick. Let me do that. I can show them this, that in the era of Donald Trump, it has changed dramatically. I'll have to go and do the math because in the email, it doesn't look like Brad Parscale did the math for everybody like he usually does. But Donald Trump, if you do the math, his low dollar donations, which is, we're talking about $200 or less, contributes to upwards of 98% of his total contributions. That is unheard of for a Republican candidate. That is unheard of. They don't get their money like that, folks.
And I would think an exceedingly high percentage of those people had never donated to a political campaign before.
Absolutely. And actually, we can show that. We can see that to be the case. When I go back in the voter files, I'll at least show people where it's located. But there's voter files, there's consumer files, and then there are, it's going to scare people that someone
Rich,
like
I'll be right back.
this much. Go ahead, Tim. It's going to scare you that people like me could know this much about you. But state, federal, any kind of donations, whatever it may be to a candidate, causes, there's totally separate database for that. So we'll know whether this is the first time this person has ever given to any political cause, any political candidate. And again, we can run an analysis on that. We can see that. And Donald Trump absolutely has people donating that. We're not financially or politically involved much at all until he came along. I just wanted to show everybody this real quick. And since I got the floor to myself here, this is the trend for Wall Street donations from 2000 to 2018. And actually, this really could be updated for the Senate to add newer numbers for the Senate, because it's actually worse than this. You could see, like I said, people on Wall Street hedge. This is Wall Street campaign contributions. And then you could see really the era of Mitt Romney blows up here, and Republicans are just getting their money from larger donors. And that is true. That's to be the case. Then we get to Donald Trump, and in the era of Trump, it completely collapsed. And it is typical, or at least it's not, it wouldn't be a surprise. In years when you know that a party is going to do well, history is on their side. So we're talking about first term incumbent midterms, when a party is in power for 2 terms in the White House, Wall Street will hedge. They know one is more favored than the other. Well, here though, we saw a dramatic change. And in 2018, that continued and it completely fell off. Democrats got 62.8% of the total 91 plus million. Republicans only got a little over 33 million, and that was about 37%. When I add the Senate numbers, which I can see this chart hasn't, I guess, whatever data set is connected to this chart on the other end, this one at least hasn't been updated, because the Senate numbers came in after we did this, and the Senate was actually even worse. So this would be a little bit wider is my point. So I just wanted to at least show you guys that trend, because still to this day, right, Tim, there are a lot of Democrats who roll on this idea that Republicans are the party of Wall Street. And it's just not true. So, I
don't know where they come up with that, but
I know.
I just think it's an easy thing for them to say. But if you go around now from both the big sell side firms and even the big buy side operations, I think, the C-suite is heavily, heavily Democratic.
Yeah. And
I mean, Larry Fink at BlackRock is, clearly a big Democratic donor as well as a supporter of key people. Lloyd Blankfein has been out of the C-suite at Goldman for maybe a year and a half. Clearly, he was a big Democrat. And I just think people like that and Jamie Dimon, just go up and down the list. I just think people like that view a guy like Tom Perez, who runs the DNC, as just, possibly one level beyond knuckle dragging street fighter that I can't imagine they want to have anything to do with him.
Right. And just I think it's pretty clear though that if Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee. Now, Wall Street loves Joe Biden. That's one of the reasons why he's having a problem raising money, because a lot of these people have already maxed out for the primary. And now the primary's over. He's a presumptive, or will be soon. He'll be able to go back and tap those people, Tim. But
they love Joe Biden. They love Joe Biden from 4 to 5 years ago and past that.
The credit cards the financial institution.
I think any of those guys that listen to him talk and listen to him on, in front of a camera, it's just gotta be cringeworthy.
Well, he's going to, but barring a Bernie nomination, the Democratic Party's candidate is going to get this backing. I mean, will the disparity be as wide as it was? I don't know. We'll have to see. 18 was the largest disparity ever measured. So I don't know that, to be the case, but now that we know Bernie won't be the nominee, we can say with pretty good certainty that it's, it's them. We didn't do, well, I went over the
But what are they really supporting? What are they really supporting? Are they supporting a Joe Biden presidency, or are they supporting whoever might end up being the president after Joe just can't quite carry on?
And I think a lot of it too should be looked at as what they're not supporting. They're not supporting Donald Trump's trade policies and other things that, look, Wall Street doesn't like tariffs, Tim. The Wall Street Journal is obsessed with tariffs. Yes. I mean, and so they're obsessed with them. So, that's a lot of this has to do with what don't they like as well. We didn't do the market update when I did my spiel before. Why don't we go ahead and give a market update real quick, because there's only 13 minutes left.
Well, the market's just kind of, where it's been really since 10 o'clock, 10:15. The Dow's down 2%. The S&P's down a little less. Crude oil has actually turned around a little bit. It was lower earlier. It's now up 1%. I just think that you're not going to see a meaningful move higher in crude until we start to see a real timetable on restarting the economy. And the Russell, which had the largest gain on Friday, has a larger decline than the other averages today. It's down about 3%, pretty much almost what you'd expect coming into today. It's the beginning of earnings season in full force, but the reality is, or any projections that stock analysts had for corporate earnings this year and economists had for GDP projections for the remainder of 2000 has been pretty much scrapped and just thrown in the trash bin, because it's nothing really more than an educated guessing game, both for corporate earnings and for overall numbers on the economy.
Right. Well, let me pop myself back in here. Sorry, I was looking at I was looking at questions, but I was also looking at Rasmussen earlier when we were on, I guess. I want to mention this. They sent me a pretty cool poll to look at, and I think this is interesting. back to the era of Donald Trump, right? And we were talking a lot about hydroxychloroquine. So this new Rasmussen poll, Tim, says that only 6%, well, only, but 6% of American adults, first of all, say they have they or a family member, immediate family member, has been diagnosed with the coronavirus. That's a low number, especially compared to some of the other numbers. I think it was from Pew and Fox, who, do you know somebody, or they're talking specifically about immediate family.
Right.
And that's a pretty low number. But anyway, among and this is of American adults. Get this, Tim. 38%, less than 4 in 10, 38% say they would take hydroxychloroquine if they were diagnosed with the coronavirus.
Right.
And I can't do it. I can't show the screen because I have Rasmussen's Platinum. I don't want to do that to them, because
Right.
that's their business model. But I can guarantee if I open it up, you know what? Let me do it. I can guarantee if I open it up, I'm going to see that Democrats are the vast majority of that. That's where we are now, Tim, in an era where people are willing to say, here's the question. If you were diagnosed with COVID-19, would you take the drug hydroxychloroquine? Democrats are 46% no, 36% unsure, only 18% said yes. A majority, 53% of Republicans said yes, another quarter about are unsure, and 40% of unaffiliated voters are unsure whether they take this drug. Look, if your doctor comes to you, folks, the people on the front lines don't politicize this. Maybe the governors do, well, not maybe, they do. They did. But the doctors in the field.
Look, I'm sure that the member of the Michigan House of Representatives would have answered no to that question also, who's a Democrat, a fairly attractive African-American female Democrat who ended up with the coronavirus. And after everything else, her condition continued to deteriorate until she heard Trump talking about hydroxychloroquine, asked her doctor about it. He prescribed it for her, and 3 days later, she was better.
Yeah. And I think,
and she was very public about thanking him for mentioning it. I'm sure to the chagrin of the governor.
I could be mixing up somebody else's story, but I think maybe her husband, she said, I don't know. She was on Laura Ingraham, right? Maybe
yes, she was.
Yeah. Maybe like somebody in her family, had said it, but I just want to say this. It's 11:52, and I just want to mention this because I think there's a lot of people out there who don't, this person on Twitter right now, talking about the damage to health from economic downturns. There hasn't been enough conversation in the mainstream media narrative about the damage that is done from economic downturns. None of us have ever faced a depression, Tim, so it's like not real to people. But even just recessions, the suicide rates that we saw during the Great Recession, the hotlines blowing up down here, the domestic abuses. How many people, folks? I mean, opioid abuse has touched almost every household in this country, if not every household. How many, alcoholics or opiate addicts or any kind of drug addict, how many are missing their weekly NA sessions right now? How many alcoholics are missing their weekly AA sessions right now? They're not meeting with their sponsors. I mean, so and I'm only saying this because of the comment I got on Twitter. I guess we were talking about this before, and then they said something about it. It's almost immeasurable, is my point. Just because you haven't heard it talked about doesn't mean you can't critically think about this, folks. It's almost immeasurable. And GDP, the correlation or the causation between rising growth rates, GDP growth rates, and rising standards of living and life expectancy is well documented. Of course, the reverse of that would be true. All right. So I just want to get that out there because I'm not going to I'm just not going to let people make and like try to frame this, Tim, as like a money versus health thing. Money is health. That's the sad reality of it. And there's plenty of evidence to support that. So it's not just a money versus health issue. All right. With a few minutes left, I will also just say to let Lisa know we will get to Pennsylvania tomorrow, Lisa. Okay. I was going to do Minnesota, but because we keep, and you're not the only one, we keep getting people, they want to see Pennsylvania. So we'll do Pennsylvania tomorrow, which I think would be the second biggest heavy lift for Donald Trump. Again, I'm very bullish on Minnesota with him, Tim. He didn't even compete for it. He went there one time because I gave Larry the poll.
Right.
And then Larry gave it to Bannon, and Bannon said, "Whoa, let's go to Minnesota one time." If they would have competed for it, he could have flipped that state. I mean, I am certain with every bone in my body, and that is because Donald Trump is a populist, and that state is a populist state. They have a totally different Democratic Party. It's not even the National Democratic Party. They do their own state thing there, and they have kept their roots of populism. And if you elect or what's the word I'm looking? If you nominate, if your standard bearer is a corporate Democrat, which is what some Bernie voters like to call them, like corporate Democrats, it can hurt. It can hurt bad, and it gives somebody like a Donald Trump, who's more of a populist, has more populist undertones in his platform. It can give him or them, anyone, it just so happens that Donald Trump was the first one to do it. Then it can give them an opportunity. And that recent poll, Tim, we saw, if he really is 52, 54% in the burbs, the twin, in the Minneapolis suburbs, if he really is, then he's got a really good shot. Because the reason why he was down in ours was because he was only about 47, 46%. The exit poll showed we were also like almost spot on with that one. And he fell a few points shy because of that. And if he can, obviously he'd have to maintain his margin in the rest of the state, Tim. But if he was able to eke that up to 52, 54%, then, there's a lot of votes over there. There's a lot of votes. That could make a big difference, So, and that would also mean he's going to run better other places. Yeah, but we'll do Pennsylvania tomorrow because everybody's dying to see Pennsylvania. And we'll show you where Biden on paper is strong. This is why they, were so, people were so, Democrats were so bullish on Biden's chances in Pennsylvania. Hillary Clinton was supposed to be strong there too. And it used to be called Biden. We'll get in and we'll show them Biden town, but we'll also show them where he's going. Because, Tim, if people haven't seen it, they go to PPD and just search for Rust Belt Revolution, and I'll link it in the YouTube article. In the YouTube, so people can go back. And when the idea that voter turnout was all they needed to do is just not true. You can make that argument in Michigan, the state we just went over. You can make that case. But in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, he just beat her. It was margin changes. It had nothing to do with voter turnout. That he just beat her. And Biden is going to have to reverse where we'll show you where tomorrow. He's going to have to reverse some of that. And it doesn't matter what the polls say. She was up by 6, 8, 10, right? All sorts of crazy numbers. If you take Trafalgar Group, and I forgot the name. They've changed their name since 2016. Remington, it was at the time. If you take Remington out and you take Trafalgar out, then the RCP average gets very, very Clinton, right? So you can, the Franklin Marshall, those polls all had her winning that state outside the margin of error. They always go back and you'll hear people say, well, the polls were generally within the margin of error. Only if you take out the polls that they never gave any attention to, right, Tim? So How many times did you see Remington research on Fox News? Not at all. Never. Nobody even really knew who Patrick was about when Trafalgar was throwing out his numbers. And he got
Maybe, maybe he got cited on Hannity or something. It wasn't until after the election that Patrick got attention. And if you were to pluck him out of there and pluck the other one out of there, then he's basically he was losing those races outside the margin of error. Now we got 30 seconds left, so let me just go through the spiel real quick, everybody. Thanks for watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. Come back and get us again tomorrow at 10 a.m. If you're watching on Periscope, give us those likes. Follow those accounts. If you are watching on Facebook Live, give us those likes. On YouTube, hit the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified when we're going to be on live, that's what that little bell there is for, right? But again, thanks for watching, folks. And if you want to support the show, subscribe to PPD, ppdnews.us/subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter right here, right over there at peoples_pundit. And as usual, I am joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him on Twitter at TJAnderson1. Again, at TJAnderson1. And we will see you guys back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's all about Pennsylvania tomorrow. All the best, folks.